as I took a look at what's happening in our world this week, I decided it would be good to talk about equanimity. And, as we know, even in our day-to-day lives, when things are going pretty well, equanimity is still a pretty important quality to develop. And the Buddhists certainly held it as a very high, important quality and practice. He put it at the top of the list of the 7 enlightenment factors, that real equanimity is, essential for awakening and kind of the last step before the realization of nibbana, if you can call it a step. I mean, all those factors work together and they come to their full kind of usefulness and skillfulness and presence as part of the process of waking up and realizing nibbana. And in the suttas, the word upekkha, translated as equanimity, is really shows up in 2 different senses, 2 different ways. The neutral feeling, or the absence of pain and pleasure, is one way that word upekkha is used, but that's not the one we care about very much. The one we care about is the attitude of even-mindedness. So when we face every kind of experience, regardless of whether we like it or not, or whether it's painful or pleasant, with an attitude of even-mindedness, with an attitude of calm, reflective, wise presence. And so it's very important to recognize that that's the kind of equanimity that the Buddha is talking about in these various lists where it shows up, or in the Brahma Viharas also. It's in that case really seeing the expansiveness of equanimity, and how equanimity is the state of mind within which we can most beneficially and in a wholesome way hold the things that are very difficult to hold. So like I said, looking at what's happening in the world at this point, and there are many wildfires, for example. There's a web page actually called Current Wildfires Burning in the US. And the top of the list is Alaska, where there's more than 2.5 million acres have burned just recently. Nevada, New Mexico, California, Arizona, Texas. Right now, it's the site says that there are 235 fires burning in California, and I'm sure that some of those are small, but just the concept, just the reality that our climate is changing. This is something that we somehow have to be present with, hopefully in a way that's constructive and supportive of living beings. And then some of the other things that are happening, the incredibly horrible food shortages in the world due to the climate change, due to the war in Ukraine, food prices going up high, programs where they usually provide aid to the people who are in most need, not having enough resources to do that. So severe humanitarian crises, and we could go on down the list. And so one way to view all of this with equanimity is to remember that these things have always happened one way or another, and they come in cycles. I remember when I was a young person, maybe in my teens, so this is back in the 1960s probably, I would listen to my parents and grandparents talking, and they were frequently would say something like, well, the world is just getting worse. It's getting worse and worse. And I had read, different quotes like that. And then they're from someone who lived like, 600 years ago or something, it's like, and I thought, yeah, this must be the way old people think. I'm not going to think like that. Here I am. I'm an old person and I'm thinking, holy cow, things are getting worse. And I'm sorry to say that I hear young people also now recognizing the worsening of conditions. And still, there are some things besides the challenges of samsara that are beautiful, supportive. There's still an opportunity to develop the mind, develop the heart, and recognize how much goodness there is in people and in the world. And to be able to practice in a way that we can hold all of it. That we don't have to kind of sugarcoat things and paint it all as if it's all fine. And we don't have to go into despair over the challenges, the problems. So I want to take a look at a passage in the suttas that gives us some idea of how to practice. First, before I look at the passage, I should say that there are a couple of other things about equanimity that are important to remember, which you probably know already, but just for the record, equanimity is not the same as indifference. So even though we might come in contact with what's good or what's not good, and or pleasant or painful, and be kind of doesn't matter. It doesn't mean it's equanimity. Or if we're not touched by what's happening, either wholesome or unwholesome, or tragic or beautiful, it doesn't mean that we're practicing equanimity. If what's really there is indifference or dullness or kind of being checked out. In the Thai forest tradition, there's this saying called water buffalo equanimity. Like no matter what's happening, the water buffalo is pretty calm and immovable and steady, but they're not practicing equanimity, which is actually having a bright, clear mind, and really wise, being very, very clear and seeing things as they actually are. So equanimity is associated with the third and the fourth jhana, to really be in a state of mind where, like the most intense of those beautiful spiritual feelings like piti have faded away, and the mind is calm, fully aware. In the third jhana, you still feel pleasure with the body, so there's still the sukha. But then, the way that one is perceived who abides in the third jhana frequently is that they have a really pleasant kind of mental state or abiding. They're very equanimous and mindful. And the fourth jhana is entirely really due to the purity of mindfulness, due to equanimity. And all of the pleasure and pain and the joy and the grief and sorrow have all gone. But it is also not the dullness of just being checked out, obviously. It's a bright, beautiful state of mind. So I'm going to take a look at this little passage, and I'm just going to read some of it to you. It's a sutta we've taken in Sutta Study. We've looked at in Sutta Study before. It's in the Majjhima Nikaya, number 28, the Greater Discourse on the Elephant's Footprint. And I'm going to read a little bit of it from Bhante Sujato's translation. It's Venerable Sariputta talking to the mendicants. And I'm not going to talk about the whole sutta, but just the part I'm going to highlight gives us some ideas about how to practice developing equanimity. He talks in there about the four elements: earth, water, fire, and air. And for each one of them, which seems particularly apropos to us in our situation, he talks about how they change. How for each one, they can get kind of extremely up in our face or disappear. And the passage where he talks about the fire element, he says, there comes a time when the exterior fire element flares up. So he's already talked before this about what it means to have the interior fire element, the warmth and the digestion and all the things inside the body that are related to the fire element. And so he talks about the interior fire element, the exterior fire element, and the same with the other elements. But here he says, the fire element flares up. It burns up villages, towns, cities, countries, and regions until it reaches a green field, a roadside, a cliff's edge, a body of water, or a cleared parkland, where it's extinguished for lack of fuel. So that's the fire element on steroids. And now the other side comes. There comes a time when they go looking for a fire. So people go looking to try to make a fire, taking just chicken feathers and strips of sinew as kindling. So for all its great age, so the history of fire, the fire element will be revealed as impermanent, liable to end, vanish, and perish. What then in this ephemeral body, what then of this ephemeral body appropriated by craving? So if fire comes and goes, and so does earth, and so does water, and so does air, and what about the body? Rather than take it to be I or mine or I am, the mendicants just consider it to be none of these things. And if others abuse, attack, harass, and trouble that mendicant, they understand this painful feeling born of ear contact has arisen in me. That's dependent. It's not independent. What's it dependent upon? It's dependent upon contact, upon hearing those words. They see that contact, the feeling, the perception, the choices, and consciousness. They see it all as impermanent. Based on that element alone, their mind becomes eager, confident, settled, and decided. So Interesting. So hearing things we don't want to hear, maybe things that we ordinarily would take personally. Sorry, Venerable Sariputta here saying, don't take it personally. Don't think of it as mere mind. Recognize how it comes about. And then by putting your attention on this fundamental element, I think he's referring here to the earth, water, fire, or air, like the way everything in nature comes and goes. You can become solid in your mind, not affected. He goes on to say, others might treat that mendicant with disliking, loathing, detestation, striking them with fists, stones, sticks, or swords, and they understand the body is such that fists, stones, sticks, and swords strike it. But the Buddha has said in the simile of the saw, even if low-down bandits were to sever you limb from limb, anyone who had a malevolent thought on that account would not be following my instructions. So it's referring back to that sutta that I'm sure people have all heard about, this simile. And then it goes on, my energy shall be roused up and unflagging, my mindfulness established and lucid, my body tranquil and undisturbed, and my mind immersed in samadhi. Gladly now, let fists and stones and sticks and swords strike this body, for this is how the instructions of the Buddhas are followed. Yeah, high bar, I know, but a way of practicing. Then this is more. While recollecting the Buddha, the teaching, and the enlightened Sangha in this way, equanimity based on the skillful may not become stabilized in them, in the mendicant. In that case, they stir up a sense of urgency. It's my loss, my misfortune, that while recollecting the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the enlightened Sangha in this way, equanimity based on the skillful does not become stabilized in me. It's like, holy cow, I got to get on this. Then he uses a common kind of situation in his day. Says they're like a daughter-in-law who stirs up a sense of urgency when they see their father-in-law. So that might offend our sensibilities today, some of those who've been daughters-in-law. But we could think of whatever case where maybe it's the person we're working for, maybe it's someone we would like to think well of us, but whatever, there are times when we kind of snap to. Maybe it's our teacher. I remember Ajahn Jayasaro in a talk once, he said, at the end of the day, you can look back on your activities and your actions, and you can feel pretty good about it. And then you think, what would my teacher think? And then, oh, it might be a little different. And it's not intended to be shaming, but really to do what we need to do with our mind to stir up that urgency, to be on the ball with this, really willing to work with the mind, whatever it takes. So then, but if while recollecting the Buddha and the Dhamma and the Sangha in this way, equanimity based on the skillful does become stabilized in them, they're happy with that. And at that point, much has been done by that mendicant. So all of these mental states we find ourselves with, this is a golden opportunity. How do I have the chance? Do I have the mindfulness, first of all, to stop for a moment? Do I have the chance and just take a little time with myself and acknowledge where I'm at with this? And then see if that recollection of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, can help bring about that inner stability. And sometimes, and kind of looking back at the 6 reflections, where it's the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, and then one's own virtue and one's own generosity, and how your qualities are similar to the qualities of the devas and what got them to the deva realm. And I'm sure you all have some, or you wouldn't even be here. So don't think, oh no, not me. You're already interested in this. And that takes some good qualities. And, to think about whatever it is that brings that calm to the heart. Excuse me, okay. I'm hearing voices outside. That's very unusual here. How equanimous can I be? Hopefully pretty equanimous. We'll see what happens next. So it's up to us, each of us individually. And it's up to each of us. And it takes incredible honesty and a real, I want to encourage a real trust that awakening is available, that you can do this, that you can, that we all can really realize the truth of the Dhamma. And each way we approach the mental states that we have and the habits that we have, and we make progress. So we might be able to look back at our own history and see, yeah, I've come a long way. Much has been done by this being that I happen to be right now. And that's a good thing. That's really, it's not a self-aggrandizing thing. It's a way of recognizing how the practice unfolds, how the training happens. And it's up to us to take it up, this training. There's a nice little metaphor that I found in a guided meditation. So I don't listen to very many guided meditations. I generally either have complete silence in meditation, or I guide myself. Sometimes give myself a pep talk, but I happened upon this meditation, and the person who gives it, this is on Insight Timer. You can check it out if you want. Her name is Bethany Ariel Hagen. And this is a meditation on, let me see, I'm going to check out the actual name of it, the rhythm of sleep. And I was attracted to it because I've gotten this impression that my rhythm of sleep is not a good one. But I'm learning, and she mentions this in this guided meditation, that my rhythm of sleep is actually very common, has been a very normal rhythm, which is one where you sleep in 2 phases rather than 1. So yeah, I've had this since early childhood. Get up in the middle of the night and play for an hour or 2, and then go back to sleep. And I still do it. And it's totally at odds with the monastic schedule. Just like, so for many years, I would get up after what they call the first sleep. And this is in older literature. Like it was so common that they could refer to the first sleep and the second sleep, and everyone would know what that meant. And for years, and it's only getting the first sleep, and in a tradition where you should eat little, sleep little, and talk little. It's like most of the time you're exhausted, at least if you're like me. And so that's easier when you're in your 30s and 40s and 50s, but in my 60s, not so much. Anyway, the point being, in this guided meditation, Bethany talks about observing the mind, and she compares it to the mind to a river, and the thoughts to the water, and how you can sit on the bank of the river and you can watch, like, at certain times when it's in the summer and it's warm and there's not much rain, and which is the conditions we have now here. The water is very slow and lazy, soft. And the mind, the thoughts can be like that. It's the same river, same mind, but the thoughts can be slow and not very charged. But then when a storm comes, or when it is a season where there's a lot of rain, then the thoughts might be moving very fast, or there might be a lot of them, and they can actually, be disturbing. And she points out that we still have the choice to stay sitting on the bank of the river watching the thoughts go by. So I don't know if you'll enjoy that metaphor or not, but it's I found it pleasant to consider. And then as we're sitting there on the bank, watching the thoughts and the emotions, then we have this choice, which, like so many choices go unnoticed. We don't realize we can actually affect what's happening in our mind, but we can. And then to recognize, I don't have to fall into the river and go with it. I can just observe that, and even bring in, like this sutta said, thoughts of the Buddha, thoughts of the Dhamma, thoughts of the enlightened ones, and your own practice, and how much has happened so far, and your own potential, and take it seriously, and how much more important that is than whatever anyone could say to you, or whatever any circumstance that could arise in our life. And of course, the more we are able to stop ourselves, to stop our reactions, to reflect, to bring in that sense of equanimity, then the better we get at it, like anything that we practice. And I'm, always impressed with the kinds of skills human beings develop. I mean, Olympic athletes, and, great musicians, and, it's like, look at the stuff human beings can do. All kinds of incredible things, not just the exceptional ones either, all of us. We have the ability to learn and develop skills. And this is a skill, the skill of bringing the mind to equanimity, the skill of using mindfulness and clarity and wisdom instead of whatever conditioning we've had in the past for dealing with what comes along. This is one worth really paying attention to. So I'm gonna stop my comments there. And I think this might be a good time to meditate. So find a comfortable position. I'm going to let you settle in for a minute, and I'm going to check out what's happening outside. It'll just take a second, I think, and then I'll be back with you. So as we sit comfortably, and we bring our attention to the body, and bring our attention to our breathing. And invite the mind to settle. And perhaps the simile of sitting on the bank of the river, watching the water, watching the thoughts flowing through is useful. Seeing how much activity or stillness is there. And as we observe, whatever we observe, it changes. And we can see if we can just stay there and not feel like we have to move the mind. Just observe, be present, and invite a sense of peacefulness and clarity. To support. So I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on equanimity or anything else. Yes, Cynthia?
Yes, hi. Yeah, I have a question that it's a little bit peripheral, but during this whole process that we've been going through with, the chaos and the noise and the dust and all this stuff, and trying to work with it and find ways to come back to some balance, and one of them is taking refuge in impermanence and knowing that, it'll be over, which it's getting there. But the other one that's been helpful, but I have a question about it, is sometimes gratitude is helpful,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm in the middle of all this and I say, you have a home, it's safe, you have what you need. Yeah. But when, and I do a lot of gratitude practice, but sometimes I just have a question about it, because it seems like gratitude is focusing on being happy because everything is going the way that I want it to,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of veers into, it feels like kind of reinforcing attachments to preferences. And so I'm just a little confused about how that fits in and where it's helpful and where it's maybe not so wholesome.
Yeah, I think this is a very important distinction. Like, what are we grateful for? And that's not like it's bad to be grateful for having a roof over our head and our, all of those material things that support us. I think that's fine. But then also include all the things that are not material. The resiliency of your mind, the support of the people in your life, the existence of the Dhamma, the clarity that has come into our lives as a result of the Buddha's teachings, and what he did. So those 6 reflections on the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, virtue, generosity, and the devas, that has nothing to do with your material life or all those things that can be swept away, as the Buddha said, in an instant. A flood comes along and it's all gone. And when we're dying, we're going to have to let go of everything. And then what are we going to be grateful for there? We've got to go beyond the material, beyond the physical, beyond, we've got to practice that now.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for the point. Ron and Serena.
I'm very grateful for this sutta and your reflections today. I are very helpful for me with your voices were going on outside, and something else that happened that caused me to arrive late and sort of ragged this morning was I went out for my morning garden walk and immediately smelled smoke again, which immediately put me in PTSD, high vigilance in the wake of, 2-3 weeks ago. For the second time while living here, I was with a hose over next door fighting a fire in their weed patch of 6-foot tall tumbleweeds until the fire truck got here. So that's part of why I was raggedy, and part of, as you can imagine, that's part of our decision to leave here, because after 13 years, it's only getting worse, not better. And I have faith that my nervous system no longer feels safe in this neighborhood, because this neighborhood has changed since I came here. And it's time not to be living around foolish people and around wise people. So we're moving step at a time. Yeah, toward that. And I want to study that sutta a little. Could you give me that source again of that sutta, please?
Yeah, let me put it into the chat. Or maybe someone else can do that It's
Thank you.
for 28. And it's called The Greater Discourse on the Elephant's Footprint in the Majjhima Nikaya.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And it's the part I read is kind of down in later in the little bit later in the sutta, but you'll find it all there. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Serena. Yeah, Lisa, sorry.
That's okay. One phrase you said during your talk just really jumped out at me. And you said, so many choices go unnoticed. And it's just pertaining to equanimity. For me, my struggle with equanimity is often just the overwhelm of what's going on personally or in the world. So, some of the options are distraction and shutting down in certain ways. But that keeping that in mind about choices, so many choices go unnoticed. That we have so many choices and so many layers of choices. It's something I have to think about more. And if I'm distracted or shut down, I don't even have awareness of my choices. And, that's one of the first steps. And then there's the courage to make choices. That's another layer. So I'm really pondering the whole issue of choices.
Yeah, yeah. And what you're reminding me of is the way the Buddha looked at things. He looked at everything from the perspective of what's going to help you get enlightened, what's going to help you transcend samsara. I mean, it's about developing the mind, developing the heart. What's going to bring kamma results? What's going to bring vipaka kamma that's helpful, and what's going to bring results that are down pulling. And so, of course, being distracted or in some way checking out is not helping us wake up, and it's not helping us develop. Spiritual bypassing doesn't, acting like, hey, I've got it all handled and not really looking at what's going on inside. That doesn't help. Sometimes people think that they're further along on the path than they are, and it really holds them back. And the Buddha was concerned about what holds us back. And he says, if these methods, like being, distracted or something, helped. I mean, he didn't say this particularly, but he says things like this. If that helped, I would teach you that. But it doesn't. It takes us in the wrong direction. So first and foremost about choices is seeing that we have other options besides the ones we've been conditioned to notice and make the way, and follow. And so it can be so deeply conditioned that we don't even feel like there is a choice. Oftentimes people feel like they get angry, they have no choice, it's there. No, there's a point at which we decide to go with it, even if we don't realize it. Then we have to slow it down and recognize, hey, I don't have to act this way. I don't have to think this way. I don't have to perceive this way. I can look at how the Buddha does it, how he talked to people, how he responded, and I can pattern that. I can train myself to do more of that. And it's not easy. I mean, I find myself in certain situations reacting in ways I don't want to react. And what I think is helpful is to kind of step back a few steps, like, what is the situation like? What are the causes and conditions that bring me to saying or doing or thinking in this way? And then look at those causes and conditions, and we may have choices about that, whether or not I keep those causes in my life, whether or not I have an opportunity somewhere in there to make a shift. Even if, okay, I'm going to be in this situation is where I usually act in such and such a way. Now, what if I give myself a lecture before I go in? What if I make a determination that I'm going to do it differently this time and I try that? Sometimes we can't see options ourselves and we need to talk with others, or we need to observe others. Why is it that not everyone is reacting to my mother the way I react to my mother? She's passed on now and she was great, let me tell you, but it was hard for me a lot of times. And like, just really looking at, what are other ways of doing this? How can we hold the situations in some ways? It's working with the small things sometimes that helps us be ready for the bigger things.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Joyce?
I just want to start with, I have a lot of difficulty with the imagery and the similes in the suttas. I really, really struggle to understand them. And I happen to have the good fortune this week of hearing something that really broke through my understanding of the simile of the saw. That it's so profound. I can hardly believe. I mean, I'm still, I think, at a beginning section, but it really begins with the state of the mind in receiving criticism.
Mm.
And the first example, the first image, which I couldn't understand, was to be solid and unmovable like the earth. Train the mind so that it's solid, immovable like the earth. And the second was be like the sky, mind like the sky that's open and words don't stick. This is in response again to criticism. And then to be like water, where fiery, harsh words don't affect the mind. And then the last one was like a catskin bag that has been really well worked and it's soft and pliable and receptive. And then, and unfortunately, in a way, to me, is there's this giant leap into like to train the mind thus to be able to handle like the worst thing that could happen to a human being, but to maintain all those qualities that were about criticism. And unfortunately, that's what sticks in people's mind is this horrific situation. And I just love the images now. I'm falling in love with images, and it's been such a long, hard road to get to this place. And what you were just saying to Lisa was actually addressing those kinds of steps that one can take. So I just wanted to share that and just my happiness at having the feeling that it might be possible for me to understand the suttas.
Oh,
Oh,
great. Well, it's all due to your persistence, It's not easy for many of us, and it takes some digging in and unlocking. So that's great. Thank you, Joyce. Josh?
Just a couple moments ago, you were talking about your own reflections on, being in a situation that's difficult for you, or perhaps someone is acting or speaking or treating you in a way that's, just difficult. And the topic being equanimity, that kind of situation, what a great practice. It faces us with that. And something that I was struggling with a while back was, being in the company of people who, just for some reason, they're really good at kind of triggering all of my pet peeves all at once, the strongest ones. And, I'm trying, I'm trying to hold my practice tight, and it failed. And I'm wondering, just in your own experience, if you have any wisdom, any advice about what you do, especially right at the moment when the pet peeve, the word, the action, whatever it is, right when it comes out, and you're starting to recognize that your mind is kind of going, it's on that train, it's going in the places you don't want it to go. How are you stopping that? How are you bringing it back in, or how are you catching it right there and saying, nope, not going there? Any advice on that?
Yeah. I mean, at first it's catching it after the fact, because we don't yet know how to stop the train. We don't even sometimes know that we can stop the train. And so, we see what we did and we don't like it. And this is all part of, vimamsa, like those 4 iddhipadas, when you're checking and evaluating, and you look back at, that situation. Sometimes it can be really painful because we didn't want to do that. I'd get angry with my mom or upset with her, and I didn't want to be upset with her. I didn't want her to feel bad, and, it's when you talk about the hitting all the pet peeves at once, and I'm not asking for any details, but it sounds like family to me. Maybe it's not, but it's like those folks, they were deeply involved in the conditioning that we have, and so after the fact, so what do we do? And one important thing to learn is how to let go of our own disgust with ourselves and our own self-recrimination, and to start to imagine how I want to do it differently next time. And with my mom, I actually went through all kinds of efforts. I talked about it in therapy. I did past life regression. I did like almost every possible modality you could imagine to figure out, how do I respond in this relationship in a better way? And it really took effort, and it takes all of the practice, like every aspect of the practice, the Noble Eightfold Path, development of the Brahma Viharas, all those things, all the meditation to really like condition the mind, help the mind know that peace is better and, and we can experience it. And then to replay the situation in my mind and decide on a different approach. And then really try to make that occur. And there were a lot of other things, the misunderstandings about relationships, like we don't have the right to try to change other people, and it doesn't work anyway. So it's like we can easily bypass a whole long kind of course of futile action if we kind of get that one, it's like, and somehow this person is getting by in the world with their behaviors and attitudes and whatever, and leave it alone. It's not my business, no matter how entangled I feel with this person. So some of it's the disentangling. I have responsibility for myself, and I can't take responsibility for someone else's actions. It's not in my domain. And so if they're skillful, if they're unskillful, only if they ask for my support can I give them help. And that's not the situation we're talking about. We're talking about where I'm just trying to keep my head above water. And I need to pay attention to myself and keep my side clear. And then, really, really reflecting on the things I appreciate about that person, really reflecting on, this reflection that comes up in the suttas of, the person, this is happening and this kind of thing happens to human beings. And, there's a whole lot of stuff that's not happening, because in the simile of the saw, the Buddha was talking to the mendicants about not reacting, like Joyce was saying, reacting to criticism or reacting to people. And he said, after he gives this graphic kind of example of how you should be maintaining your, gentleness of mind. And then he says, if you can keep that in mind, what words could you not endure? And they're like, yeah, words are no big deal compared to two-handled saws and bandits and whatnot, So we got to really do what we can do to get the mind to sober up and pay attention to this stuff. And so take every avenue you can to bring the mind to what's wholesome and true. And then as we practice it, as we get a little bit better at stopping ourselves. So, it may be that something slips out, but then you stop. You can even apologize right there. If it's somebody you're close to, you could try to institute let's rewind. Can we rewind? If you're both into it, you can go back to where things started to go off track. And so many times I've realized that I could have said what I said differently, even if it's the other person who's upset. So it's like, go back, try to, like it's always this come back to before it went off track and see where the smooth path can be laid down. So that simile in the Effacement Sutta, number 8 in the Majjhima Nikaya, where the Buddha talked about, there's a rough path. That's the path of, anger, let's say. And the smooth path is non-anger. So what's the smooth path in this situation? And how do I create it? Or how do I find it? And so you just try to catch yourself as early in the process as possible when you're headed down that rough path. Back up and go the other way. And if you can't back up, just drop all the pretense, set the feelings aside and do the right thing. And then come back to the feelings later and work through them. We don't want to set feelings aside forever, because then we wind up suppressing stuff that comes out in ugly ways later. Feelings have to be dealt with, but kindly, with compassion. And then, as much as possible, do and say the right things. Even if you're in a situation where it feels entirely unfair, you're going to have to work out later that whole thing about what the heck is fair and who said it's going to be fair. We're dealing with people with defilements, and we're dealing with our own defilements. This is not about fair. It's not about rights. it is about being wholesome and unwholesome and not engaging in the unwholesome. And if other people are engaging in the unwholesome all around us, we still don't have to engage in the unwholesome. No, we need to learn how to stop ourselves, because it's way bigger stakes. The stakes are way, way more serious than just what's happening with this person in this moment. It's about where you're headed. Thank you, Josh.
Wow, what so much wisdom to unpack there. Could take perhaps several lifetimes to maybe get a grasp on it.
No, don't think like that. Next week, Josh. Next
Next
week.
week. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, it looks like we overdid it. So thank you, everyone.